Okay, I would like to call the meeting to order, the meeting of the City of Monona Plan Commission, Monday, April 8th, 2019. Roll call.
Alder Moore.
Here.
Mr. Homburg.
Here.
Mr. Stein.
Here.
Ms. Fox. Here. Mr. Dorschel.
Here.
Mr. Holmquist and Alder Spate are absent.
Thank you. I'd like a motion to approve the minutes from March 11th, 2019.
Move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any adjustments to the minutes? Having heard none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. The next is appearances. So for those of you that may not be familiar with our appearances here, each individual who's submitted a form, and if you wanted to speak or otherwise be here to register in one way or another, you should fill out a form, and they're over on the table over there. But I will take them as they came in. And when you're called, if you'd like to come up, if you'd like to speak, you should come up to the microphone over here, and you have a maximum of 3 minutes. And we're just here to listen. Yes.
We have a public hearing on the item if they're here for that one particular item.
Correct.
So it would only be if it's not for that item under appearances.
Could they not speak under appearances for that item as well?
Could, usually we have them speak under the.
Okay.
item.
There were just a few people that said that they needed
The
to
point
leave
is
soon.
if they speak
Right.
under the public hearing, then the applicant give a presentation first and they actually see it before they speak.
Correct. Yeah, there were just there were a few people that said that they needed to leave early, so that's why I was offering it. Hey, Brian. Okay, so first up, I have Peter McKeever, who would like to speak for informational purposes only. Peter, if you'd like to come up to the microphone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Plan Commission. My name is Peter McKeever. I know most of you from one thing or another. I have 30 years in Monona. I live at 6302 Southern Circle, a couple blocks from the new proposed development at 501 Broadway. First thing I want to say is that I really commend the developers for thinking about infill on this site. I'm the vice chair of the Regional Planning Commission, and one of the things that we really promote is infill as opposed to development in cornfields and greenfields and things like that. I've been looking at this piece of property for the 30 years that I've lived in the neighborhood, and I've always wondered, sooner or later, okay, I've always suspected that somebody would eventually come in and seek to develop the property. When I moved into the neighborhood, it was a filling station, and it was being cleaned up from gasoline spills. That said, I have one serious concern about the problem, the project, and that is the traffic. It only has one exit on the west end of Falcon, which means traffic coming west on Broadway is either going to do a U-turn on Broadway to get to the site, or they're going to come around on Falcon Circle. Falcon Circle is a curved street with very short sight lines. I walk my dog on Falcon Circle almost every night, and 2 or 3 times in the last week, I've had to jump on the curb because cars come around that corner very fast and they can't see you at a distance. The very first time I ever appeared before a city committee 30 years ago had to do with the traffic on Falcon Circle. And it comes back again. So I think the traffic really needs some serious attention. I also am a little concerned that the project may be a little too big for that site, and that can be figured out. Having said that, I just want to remind everybody that the city just adopted a resolution having to do with sustainable development and energy conservation. So I want to make a couple of points in that direction. It's a south-facing site with a flat roof. It's ideal for some solar. It's absolutely a perfect site for some solar. And I'd like to see some solar on it. I'd like to see 100% stay-on of stormwater. The county ordinance calls for 90%. I think in the past, Monona has tried to do 100%. I'm thinking of the Monona State Bank, for example. I'd like to see 100% stay on. I'd like to see some permeable pavement, rain gardens, and lots of trees. I'd also like to see the Plan Commission demand an interesting building. I commend the city for the building, the apartment house that's across from Monona, from the golf course. I don't remember the name of it. That's a very attractive building. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but the Triesta building on Broadway is just ugly, and the new building down by Quick Trip on Broadway is just as ugly. We can do better in Monona in terms of design. I think the new stuff going in along the river looks pretty nice, what I've seen so far. So I also want to say to the Plan Commission in general, don't be intimidated by developers if they're not willing or say they can't do what you want them to do. There's too many plan commissions that I've worked with over the years have been driven by a desire to bring in the property tax revenue. If one developer doesn't want to do what the city wants to do, say thank you, but no thanks, because another developer will step up. That piece of property has been there. Now that somebody has shown some interest in it, other developers will show some interest in it. Whether or not this is the right project, I don't know, but I'm very concerned about the size, and I'm very concerned about the traffic. But I really don't want the Plan Commission or the city to be intimidated by a developer who says, well, if we have to do that, we're going to leave. And my response is, okay, leave. Because somebody else will show up. There are lots of developers who are looking for projects right now. The economy's doing great. They'll come in and do what's necessary. There are no sidewalks on Falcon Circle. I meant to mention that a moment ago. So as I said, without sidewalks, I literally have had to jump onto the curb walking my dog a couple times in the last week, and I've been walking my dog there for 30 years. Not the same dog, mind you. I guess those are my comments at the moment. Please take those things into consideration as this project evolves and develops, and I imagine I'll be back for a public hearing along the way. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, so Peter was one of the individuals that said that he had to leave early. As Chris just pointed out a minute ago, if you would like to speak now during the appearance section, you're certainly welcome. Otherwise, you are welcome to wait until the public hearing section under new business after you've had an opportunity to see the presentation by the developer. I have the following individuals listed as on sheets here. And again, if it's something you'd like to do now because you need to leave, feel free. Chris White, who is here, would like to speak against. Kathy Hopkins, who would like to register against. Jeff Lee, who would like to register in favor and is available for questions. Adam Fredendahl, who would like to speak in favor. Kevin O'Driscoll, who's the owner and the sponsor, who would be speaking for informational purposes only. And Dan Pogue, who's here to speak against. Is there anybody that wants to come up during the appearance section? Okay, great. Then we will close the appearances, move on to unfinished business, of which there's none. Now we move on to new business, which is the public hearing. The public hearing on request for zoning permit and site plans for a mixed-use development including 41 apartment units and approximately 3,000 square feet of retail at 501 West Broadway Avenue, case number 2-002-2019. The way public hearing works, for those of you that are unfamiliar, again, may have not have been here before, so there'll be a presentation about the project, and then there's an opportunity for anyone who would like to speak after that presentation to come up to the microphone, identify yourself, and speak. And then we'll close the public hearing and move to the next section of the meeting. So, so with that, I'd like to call Jeff or Kevin or whoever is going to be coming up and presenting this evening up to the podium.
Madam Chair, did you want me to give a quick overview before we invite them up or not?
I was going to do that at the pre-hearing.
Okay.
If that works for you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time today. My name is Kevin O'Driscoll. I bought this site in 2013 from State Bank across Plains. The site was foreclosed on. I also own 416 and 420 Falcon Circle, 2 4 units just down the block. When I first looked at the site, I saw a easy 50,000 square foot site with a sidewalk and looked like a great opportunity for a curb cut on Broadway. And I've spent the last 6 years learning that it's not a very easy site, and there's probably a reason that it's been vacant for almost 30 years. I understand the concerns about traffic in the neighborhood. We did talk to the county about a curb cut on Broadway, so that there would be 2 for Falcon Circle, and we were told that a curb cut is not an option off of Broadway. We would have liked to have accessed the site on the east side of the site, but that's not an option either because of its proximity to Broadway and Falcon. It's a irregularly shaped site that lends itself to have 1 curb cut on the west side of the property. So over the last year, I've brought along Jeff Lee as a developer and partner, and then Adam Fredendahl of Jolie Architects to really focus on the architecture. I had several meetings over the past number of years, primarily with Sonia, and she commented on the profile of the site, that it's a highly visible site. It warrants exceptional architecture. I share some thoughts on Tresta and that project, and recognize that it is across the street from my site, and so we want to speak to that and make sure that we do have architecture that's it's subjective, but we want to make sure we focus on architecture, which is why we have Adam on our team, who's worked a lot in Monona and on a lot of really high-profile projects. The southern exposure of the site is not lost on us either. And so green initiatives, I think, are warranted. An infill site is warranted. Adding to the tax base of the city is important. And I've spent the last 6 years cutting grass and shoveling snow, and that's not best for the city of Monona and not best for me either. So I'm sure you all have concerns, and it's easy to be against something new, but I appreciate your time and listening to Adam's presentation on the architecture and design of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
For the gentleman in the media room, could you switch on the PowerPoint presentation from the laptop, please?
Do I just? So sorry.
There's that one right there. Sweet.
Thank you, Kevin.
Adam, if you could identify yourself again, that'd be great.
My name is Adam Frendall with JLA Architects. And I've got a slide deck here with first some plans. I'll just kind of run through the basic organization of the building and then some three-dimensional imagery. Let's see if I can get clicker. There we go. Okay, so we looked at many options on this site, just about everything we could possibly come up with in terms of both building types. We tried stack flats, we tried one longer building, but due to some of the easement concerns with the water main that comes around the corner, there's a pretty significant setback at the western corner of the site. And then it tapers off pretty dramatically on the east. So it really limits the width of a footprint on that portion of the site. So we wanted to make sure that the building form held a presence along Broadway, but yet and still is respectful to the neighborhood. So keeping back from the east end, I think still allows the homes in Falcon Circle, that green space right along the edge there, and then we push the density towards the back of the site with parking for the commercial on the area that partially covers the easement. I jumped ahead to on the ground floor, there was some groundwater concerns and bad soil concerns. So one of the ways to get this thing a little more economically feasible was to raise the parking up. It's at grade, which poses some challenges with designing that facade, which we'll get to. The green space there is 3,000 square feet of commercial directly adjacent to the parking. Your residential lobby and entrance off of Broadway, as well as 2 residential units that would have walk-ups. It's anticipated that they might be able to have some private space right out there between the front of the building and Broadway as well. Offer just a different, nice, unique walk-up apartment that could have, maybe a small little yard. As you go up to the second floor, we get to be a pretty typical double-loaded corridor. 2 bedrooms at the corners, primarily 1 bedroom's inboard. We're all 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom in this building. And then these 3 units off to the back there would have a garden roof above a portion of the parking, which would also be some other unique units for the neighborhood. On the top floor, very similar plan. To the west end, we stepped the building back away from Falcon Circle on the west side for a shared amenity patio. And directly adjacent to that, one of those apartments would be a club room for shared common space. So parking-wise, just to touch on that quickly, we are meeting city zoning ordinance, 1.5 stalls per 1-bedroom and 2 stalls per 2-bedroom. And then we're meeting a 1 per 300 square feet on the commercial, and that's all parked on site. So architecturally, with the building form that kind of jogs like this, it really lended itself more to a flat roof contemporary approach. Primary concept being to have something that looks a little more linear along Broadway, eye-catching form, and some color contrast to the background. And then really play with dressing up the parking garage wall and how can we make that look like part of the building. So as you can see there, I'll get in a little closer. From the west, you're looking at the commercial entrance on the right there. And then you've got apartments, of course, on the 2nd and 3rd floors. As you come up a little closer to the building, the concept here is to have some fenestration in the garage for daylight. There's a cedar slat with some growy vines, hops, Boston ivy. And then with the proximity to the Pirate Island moat, if you will, Kevin has a corner property directly to the west of the site, and it's anticipated that tenants here could have access to the water, so they could lock up their kayaks over here and walk them down to the water. Just another kind of unique concept for the site. Material-wise, the tannish color is likely a stone or a brick. The dark gray is fiber cement, and the wood tone is also a fiber cement product. So it does have what's going on the Monona Riverfront project right now. If you see the soffits, it's a little bit darker color than this would be, but same material. So again, the dark gray siding and masonry, and then the orangish wood tone color is also a fiber cement, but has a panelized look to it. This is from the east, looking west down Broadway. The tall form there is one of the stair towers, is to try to break the mass of it down a little bit, and then wrapping the end caps with masonry as well to anchor the building to the site. You can see also from the east, the white boxes off to the right there are the representations of the footprint of the houses. Shot from the air, looking towards the west again. And around back, you can see Those of you familiar with the property, it's pretty heavily wooded up on the hill back there. We intend to preserve as much as possible. We're gonna have to do something for stormwater as it comes down the hill towards the building, but our civil engineers are just getting involved now, so next time we come, we'll have some solutions for those items. And the last image here is from the west end of the building, looking back behind into the trees. Again, we pulled the masonry form and some of the landscaping features onto this side to wrap the corner, and then it kind of gets right back into the trees. So that is it. Are there any questions for me?
I didn't see the sidewalk on there now. Is this gonna bug
Excuse-
against the
Hang on, sir, if you would, if you could step up to the microphone, if you have questions, that's fine.
I can
We'll just-
repeat it if you want.
Okay, that'd
He was just asking if that he doesn't see a sidewalk on there. There is going to be a sidewalk. The way that that software program rendered the grass, it just kind of covered the sidewalk. So
Now, those trees are gonna be behind the sidewalk or before the sidewalk?
I think those are anticipated to be on the terrace. But we've got,
Road and the sidewalk?
yeah, I think we've got to get a landscape architect involved to start really thinking about landscaping design. This is really first round at graphic representation of the building, so we're just trying to get the idea across.
How many
Sir-
feet back
sir.
from Broadway?
If you,
Can you come up?
yeah, if you could go up to the microphone, that would be great, thank you. And identify yourself, please, if you
I
would,
am-
and your address.
I'm Dan from 413 Falcon Circle.
Thank you.
How far off is the building from Broadway?
There is a setback from the ATC power lines that demands that we have to be at least 20 feet back from the power lines.
So you are a ways back.
Great. So at this juncture, if there is anyone else that would like to, we're in the public hearing phase, so if there's anyone else that would like to speak to this project at their microphone, this is the time now for you to come up and speak. If you had intended to before, as Peter McKeever did. So anyone that would like to come up. Yes, go ahead. Step right up.
I'm Kathy Hopkins. I live at 413 Falcon Circle. Okay, so all the parking's underground. Underground?
Most of it, it's all covered, so it's at grade, but it's in the building besides that corner lot.
And how many apartments again?
41.
So it looks so small there to have 41 apartments, doesn't it? But it's just 2 floors of apartments? And then one big commercial space? Or just
Yes, there's 3,000 square feet of commercial on the lower level.
where that blue is?
Yeah, where the blue is.
Okay. Now, and then I heard him say like that across the street on the river there where that empty lot is, you're gonna put a dock there for canoes or?
Ma'am, could you,
Oh.
sorry, could that?
You're gonna
speak
put
into
a
the
dock
mic
there for
That'd be
canoes,
great.
or-
And Kevin, if you need to answer that,
No, I'm
please
sorry.
step up to the mic as well.
The parcel across the street to the west is approximately 25,000 square feet. It's oddly shaped as well, and it has a huge right-of-way in it. And so we need to capture that right-of-way to make it developable. So we really haven't contemplated that, but the thought is that if you were gonna put in your canoe or kayak, you could walk across Falcon Circle and access it there, but I haven't contemplated a dock or anything else there.
Anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
Can I get a point of clarification? I heard the last speaker indicate 2 floors of apartments, and I believe that it's actually 2.5.
Correct. It's 2 full floors if I back up to the plans. On the ground floor, there are 2 units that help to bring a little more identity to the sidewalk experience. So those 2 blue spaces on the end are actually apartments. So 2 full floors and 2 units on the lowest level.
I just wanted to make sure that you heard it correctly.
Thank you. Go ahead.
my
Again,
name is-
identify yourself and your address first, please. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Ashley Johnson, 603 Falcon Circle. I live directly across the street. So my issue is, you can see all the cars parked. Like, where are we supposed to park our cars? Not everyone can park in the driveway. So, you know, I mean, the two driveways are taking away at least 4 parking spaces on the street, and there's no parking on the other side, on the west side. So, what about that? Sorry, I'm a little nervous. I've never been. What would you do to like help that out? Because I mean, I've lived in the neighborhood for like 6 years,
Sure.
so
I can try. So from zoning has specified guidelines for these types of projects to make sure that they're parked adequately for not only the residents but visitors. So 1.5 cars per 1 bedroom. You know, if it's a couple, they may have, some people might have 2 cars, some people might have 1, some may not have 1. 2 stalls per bedroom. So typically when these things fill up, depending on what's available, there can be a surplus within the garage, and then the parking for the commercial space at 1 stall per 300 square feet is pretty sufficient for just about anything that would go there. Not a restaurant, you know, not gonna have that kind of traffic, but, you know, any type of, commercial type space. Kevin and Jeff can talk to that better than I can, but, there are the guidelines that we could fit on the site with the program. As far as overflow and into the streets, I don't know enough about what happens over there.
We heard loud and clear from the CDA that we could not park anywhere on Falcon Circle. We had to have our site provide all the parking necessary for the apartments and for the commercial space. I think you were asking about taking away
so there's not
street
going to be
parking.
any parking on the street anymore. Is that what you're saying?
No,
No.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the site we're talking about developing needs to have all its parking on the site.
Yeah, I'm talking about
And
street
you're
parking,
talking about,
strictly on the street.
you're talking about street parking for the other residents?
Yeah, I live
Falcon
across.
Circle?
Yeah, I mean, I live across the street. My husband parks on the street every night. We have 1 car garage, so
Sure.
you know, I mean,
And I think there's 2 driveways there, so
Yeah.
I'm
that's
sure
it.
parking will be diminished.
yeah.
But
Like-
also, you know,
But
I
are we
drive-
able to park in that parking lot then? Like, can my husband park there overnight? No.
No.
But then you're taking away my parking, my public street parking. And then
I'm
other,
taking away for 2 driveways. So, I don't know, you know
Yeah.
what, I've driven that street, you live there, so I completely defer to you, but I've driven that street hundreds of times, and it always, at least in the daytime, seemed like there was sufficient parking on Falcon
yeah,
Circle.
that's because everyone's working.
Right?
I mean, people park there at night, and it's always full. I mean, you can see it's full right there. And then the fire hydrants on the corner, so you can only park so far away from that as well. So, I mean, you're like literally taking away like 4 parking spaces, and Falcon Circle is very small.
Right.
There's no parking on the west side along all of Falcon Circle. So now we're gonna have to like walk, 2 blocks just to get home?
Maybe farther.
Well,
Right.
great.
Okay.
Sounds great. I have a 9-month-old child, so
Okay.
that'll be
You
fun.
know what, cars are really awful. I mean, they really are. And so it's unfortunate that we have to have them. They're a necessary evil. And for 2 driveways, I don't know, maybe there needs to be a traffic count of how many cars are parking on the street there. I don't know that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Dan Pugh, Falcon Circle.
Yes.
Also want to reiterate on the parking. Over there at Testra with Waypoint, if you've ever tried to go over there and eat, you know you can't park. So, and you know that you can read the paper and see they come through there and write just a bunch of tickets. And so we know that the stall and a half doesn't cut it. You also got to figure along Falcon Circle there, When the boat dock gets full, which every Saturday and Sunday, they're parked along, well, on the right-hand side of that picture. The boats and trailers are parked along there, so there is an extra concern with parking because of they were kind of short-shotted on the parking for the Lots Park for the
Okay.
boats.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I'd like to speak, but when the presentation, is the presentation completed or?
This is the opportunity for anyone else who would like to respond or speak on the project or related to the presentation to step up now. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lisa Gunlock, 404 Midland Lane. So I'm not sure maybe if the question might be for the committee, but just thinking about the parking, and I heard Peter mention the lack of sidewalks. If there was a sidewalk, could there then be street parking allowed, or do you know why there is no parking on that other side of the street?
Okay.
Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I'll take that. Mhm.
Okay, maybe
Yep.
just a consideration. And then I was just wondering if any of the apartments would be considered like affordable housing units. I know it's a little, the price of living in Monona is high. I was just curious if that would be considered,
Mhm.
provide that equity
Okay.
to potential new residents. And as you know, there's been a new resolution in Monona to transition to 100% renewable energy. So I was intrigued to hear you talk about the potential of using your south-facing property and in using green features, which hopefully would help us towards those goals. I think that's all I had in mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak this evening.
Could you
regarding this
identify
project.
yourself?
I'm Chris White. My wife and I live at 518 West
Thank you.
Broadway, right across the street from the proposed development. I'd like to say a couple things. First off, I think Kevin has got a well-thought-out plan that is trying to be respectful of the neighborhood as a whole. Are you going to please 100% of the people? Probably not. But I think that from what I've seen here, he's putting his best foot forward. I would also like to echo some of the things that Peter said earlier with regard to basically 3 points. One, traffic volume and speed on Broadway. The additional shopping space there, while it's great, we do have a lot of vacancies in Monona, and that concerns me because you never want to have vacancies. And then I'd also like to echo some of the parking issues and so on. So let's talk about traffic quickly. With the increased volume on the Beltline and the number of accidents there, it pushes a lot more traffic onto Broadway. I think everybody's aware of that. The Broadway traffic, while the speed limit is 40 miles per hour, we as neighbors in that area have asked the city numerous times to take a look at the speed on Broadway.
Mhm.
We've got cars going down there routinely at 50, 55 miles an hour, and I would be totally against this project unless the city is willing to partner with policing the speeds on Broadway. It is completely, it's a dangerous road to be walking a dog, you take your life in your own hands to walk on that sidewalk on Broadway. Guarantee you that. And we've added traffic volume with Mr. Brew's Tap House, with Qdoba, with Tresta, with the apartments that were just built across from Shopko, which are right on the curb, basically. And here we're going to be adding additional traffic. not to mention the riverfront development, which is going to add significant traffic volume as well. And it's time for this body and the city to get serious about the speed on Broadway. So that's number one, with the volume and the speed of the traffic. The next thing I'd like to just mention again, with regard to the parking, I think that this is a well thought out plan with the first floor parking at grade. But I would echo the prior sentiments with regard to the 1.5 spaces typically do not seem to be enough. So where are the rest of the people going? And while I don't live on Falcon Circle, again, to reiterate what somebody else just mentioned, or Kevin mentioned, if you took a satellite image right now, and you can see in this imagery here, there's a significant number of cars parked on the street in Falcon Circle. And there is a concern about where these cars are going to go. The last thing I'd like to just throw out there is with regard to financing, and is there any tax incremental financing being thrown in for this or anything else? Because I don't, as a city taxpayer, I don't think that's a benefit to the community when we put that off for years. Tresta, you know, isn't really going to start paying in until what, 2040. So it's not helping the community at this point from a tax standpoint to get higher density housing. 20 years from now, maybe, but not today. So with that, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, before we close the public hearing, does anybody else want to speak? Okay, that being the case, I'm going to close the public hearing section. Move on to 6B, which is the pre-hearing conference on the request for a zoning permit and site plans for a mixed-use development including 41 apartment units and approximately 3,000 square feet of retail at 501 West Broadway Ave, case number 2-002-2019. And I'm going to, just as again a point of information for those of you that are here, a pre-hearing conference is an opportunity for a developer to come in front of this committee and to just get some general feedback of this is just the very, very, very beginning of what is a very lengthy process. So it's an opportunity for us to provide some feedback to a developer before they've invested in super detailed plans, and before we have an opportunity to do that, I'd like our city administrator, Brian Gatto, to give us the staff report.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. So in your packet, I included a 4-page staff report that just kind of walks through the generalities of the project. To start off, I think your comments about this being a pre-hearing workshop are important to recognize. Again, this is the opportunity to give guidance and feedback to the developer so they can make some decisions on their end before time and money is spent on preparing application materials for a true submittal for a zoning permit. So now would be the best time to give that feedback to the applicant. Second, because this is kind of the first step in a multi-part process, there's a lot of information that was, as you saw in reviewing the concept sketches, there's a lot of information that's not provided to you this evening. And that's because, as Adam mentioned, they haven't engaged the engineer or the landscape architect to address some of those more minute detail components of the application. That'll come at a later stage as they're preparing their formal submittal. So if you have feedback on some of those items, tonight would be also a good time for you to provide some feedback to them before they engage some more of the technical experts to work with them on this application. Just got a couple of brief highlight items to mention tonight. We've covered a lot of the items in the staff report with the applicant's presentation and the questions from the community, so just a couple things to add to that. First and foremost, as we mentioned, because of the narrowness of this property, the applicant is requesting that the city consider vacation of 2 pieces of right-of-way on either side of the parcel. There's a western piece of right-of-way and there's an eastern piece of right-of-way. That item would be reviewed by the city's Public Works committee before a formal determination is made by the city council. Specific to the western piece of right-of-way, there is some question about, there's an existing sanitary main that runs through a piece of that property. So there's some discussions internally among staff about what's the best way to handle that. Do you vacate that piece of right-of-way fully and then require, as part of that vacation, the developer to give you an access easement over the top of that pipe? Or alternatively, do you just grant them an easement access over the existing right-of-way and don't vacate it? I think the preference from staff, at least at this standpoint, is the first option, meaning we'd vacate both pieces of right-of-way if this project were to move forward, and then require an easement to be granted to the city as part of that. So that's one piece that's kind of hanging out there in terms of kind of the technical combination of land as it relates to this project. There was a question from a member of the audience about whether or not there's tax increment finance that's being considered as part of this project. What I can say is that the Community Development Authority has received a request from the developer for tax increment finance for this project. It is something that they're still considering yet and have not made a final recommendation on at this moment. But if they do recommend that, then it's something that will go forward to the city council for the city council to weigh in on as well. So that's another piece that's kind of out there for future consideration as well. Specific to this property, as you know from the staff report, this property is zoned commercial design district. With the way that our zoning ordinance is written, requests for new zoning permits for use in CDD require them to come before the Plan Commission for formal review and approval of a zoning permit for that. So that's the main application that'll be coming before you in the future if the developer chooses to move forward with this project. So tentatively, the applicant is thinking about putting together their application materials for submittal probably in the next couple of weeks, with the hope that they would be on the Planning Commission docket for review in late May or early June. If that is the case, the one item that the developer would need feedback on from the Plan Commission is what to do about the last meeting in May. That falls on Memorial Day, and so we just need to know if that meeting is going to get rescheduled, a week earlier, or move back a week later into June, just for coordinating schedules. So just one item to think about as you're providing your commentary tonight. I think those were the main items that weren't already touched on this evening, but I'd be happy to take any other questions that you might have.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Before I open it up to the committee for feedback, I would just like to thank you all for coming forward this evening. As you all know, and we all know as a city, economic development is a really important thing, and I can certainly appreciate, given the shape of this lot, among other things, that it's been a challenge, and I appreciate the creativity that's gone in thus far in your thinking, and I just want to thank you for coming forward. We appreciate you taking the time that you already have. With that, I'll open it up in this direction. Chris?
All right. Well, I hate to be the one to start, but if you've been talking with Sonia, well, first, let me say thanks everybody for coming. We rarely get people coming here. I know it's hard. I know you're not used to it. It's hard to stand up there and talk. It's a little nervy, but we really appreciate getting the feedback from the community, and we seriously listen to it.
Amen.
If you've been talking to Sonia at all, I'm surprised she hasn't mentioned that this is in the Broadway Design District. It is. And not only is it in the Broadway Design District, it's in the waterfront district of the Broadway Design District, which is the zone of critical application, which means it's pretty important that we meet Broadway district design guidelines there, which the first speaker, Mr. McKeever, mentioned he liked Fairway Glen a lot. That building would fit really well in the Broadway Design District. This building you propose fits really poorly in the design district, just as far as architecture. Beyond that, this particular lot within the Broadway Design District was slated for low-density CDD development, which is also ratios given in that, and the FAR ratio, or the floor to area ratio, showing us the maximum for this site is 0.5. Right now, you're something over 1. I think you've got 60-some thousand square feet and a 50-some thousand square foot lot. I didn't do the math, but it's over double what's allowed on this lot. And to me, that kind of speaks to what the first speaker talked about. It's like, wow, this is a lot of building for that site. And the reason we have it in that district with that density level is obviously because it's right next to single-family and two-family residential lots. And it's, in the city's opinion, and when we developed this district, not appropriate to put that high of a density right next to the single family. It's not that appropriate to take and put a 3-story building 10 foot off the property line of a single family home. That's a lot. Anytime we would have that disparity in zoning districts, for example, if this was multifamily, we'd have a buffer in there, and usually it's a 30-40 foot buffer, so you can get some berming, some landscaping, and just get some separation between zoning districts. The site doesn't have that right now, and I think part of the problem is this, there's so much density on it. But the buffer to the residential, to me, would be very important, and maintaining those types of densities that are called for in the plan are important. The other thing it talks about in the plan is that CDD, Commercial Design District, which is commercial with second-story apartments allowed. And right now, it's pretty much an apartment building with a little bit of commercial. Now, until your presentation tonight, I wasn't sure how this is all coming together, and with having to put that parking on the first floor, and I totally get that. This is a tough site. It's been remediated poorly once and probably needs to be remediated again. I have no idea what's happened. I remember when Transport and they came out there and burned all the petroleum byproducts off and threw the dirt back in. I'm sure you're dealing with that right now. And if you do have groundwater, that would explain why you're putting this ramp really at grade. And having to do that, and because it's a really difficult lot, it would seem to me that we can ease up on that some, but it seems really odd to me that we'd have 2 apartments down where it should be commercial. I just can't imagine somebody wanting to live on Broadway with all that traffic. So to me, if we could at least, I mean, this doesn't fit, but if we could get something like this that fits within the guidelines and at least have that frontage commercial. And there was one speaker, I mean to address what the speaker said, that this really isn't a shopping place. It's not a shopping place, and then the commission gets that. But it's commercial. When we say commercial, it could be office space, it could be services, there might be a little coffee shop, a food services. I know with the Current, which is the large one being built down in the Triangle, that one has 26,000 square foot of commercial with apartments above, and the last I heard, he's further leased on the commercial than he is on the apartments. He's doing well on both, but he's got the commercial down below pretty well leased out. So when we say that, yeah, whoever said shopping, retail's relatively dead for little nooks like that, but there are still services needed, and if we put in more apartments, more housing, there's more services needed, there's a little office spaces, there's things like that which do fill up, and I know for the Current they did fill up, which is, we're glad to see. Building materials, it was hard to tell from the material we had. During your presentation, I'm a little more encouraged. I think you've been here before, and within the Broadway Design District, we look for a lot of brick, stone, especially in the lower levels, and then some transitioning to some woods and different things like you're looking at. For me, if this building, again, I believe this building is, well, I know it doesn't hit the density goals for the site, but I would still, excuse me, if it was this building, I'd look for a little more masonry on it and just some mixing of materials. Certainly, some of the the Broadway Design District guidelines. And if you don't have a copy, I don't know, Brian, do you know, is that online? The Broadway District, I think it is.
It's somewhere on the website.
I
provided
believe it's online. I'm not sure if you've worked with those, Adam, before, but if not, I know the design guidelines are online. As far as somebody mentioned the 2 cuts, and I understand, there you are, I understand that parking is at a premium, and it is tough. But this is a buildable piece of land, and they have the right to have driveway cuts out there. And I know it's hard when you're in a neighborhood where you're really parked, but every property, including yours, has the right to have a driveway cut out there. And for the size of this property, they have the right to have 2 driveway cuts. They're not asking for a lot. And I know it makes some issues in the neighborhood, but we can't have a developable piece of land within the city and not have access to the public right of way. And we don't have the decision authority for Broadway. That's still a county road, and they have the authority over that, and I would be shocked if they let you come out to there. And the applicant also mentioned you can't go down the other side. Well, that's because the driveway gets so close to Broadway, there's no room for cars to stack and get in there. It becomes a traffic nightmare. So I have no doubt the county came back and said this is the only place you can do it. So to be able to build any type of structure here, I can't imagine you do it without two cuts, one for underground or at-ground parking garage and one for the driveway. So, sort of either, I'm the bearer of bad news for everybody here tonight. And I did want to mention, I know Brian covered it, TIF financing, that doesn't go through this committee. We excuse me, have nothing to do with that. There's a separate committee in the city called CDA, and they evaluate every proposal on its merits, and as Brian said, they forward to the council. It has nothing to do with what Plan Commission does. With Plan Commission, we're looking at our master plan, our zoning ordinance, in this case, design districts, architecture, certainly how it affects the neighborhood, traffic circulation, all those things, but we don't get to play with money here. I think there was something else in the Broadway Design District. I mentioned density, the commercial, the architecture, really, and the materials. I think you're on the right track on materials from what you said. I think another problem with not having that buffer for between two totally disparate zoning districts is, I don't know at 10 foot, I'm not saying it would be allowed at that. I don't know how you control your water on this, and then you back up to that big hill, and that big hill's coming down into you. I'm not sure how you would even control your water on your site with the 10 feet. Not that that makes you feel any better, but we would have to have some type of a buffer for a building of this size next to single family and two family. I know there's a couple 4 units in there, but apparently you own those. And they're back a little bit, I think. I don't think you abut this. Yeah. Okay, I guess that's enough for me for now. There's details to a plan, but I think we need to arrive at what would be a reasonable plan before we start talking about parking details, landscape details. They're all good questions. They're all things that we look at, and it's all things, if they do come back with a proposal, we would love to see the neighborhood come out again and give some more input, because I'll tell you what, every time we've had a public hearing, we hear ideas that, yeah, that's a good idea, or that's something, you know, that seems to fit, and I'm not saying that you can come in and you can demand exactly what that building looks like, but I'm telling you that the city will listen to your concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Rob?
I'll start with, as far as the use of the site, I'm being educated a little bit. I didn't realize this was in the Broadway Design District. And some of those densities would become kind of a concern. But that said, I've driven by this several times, like everybody has, and finding a development solution, I think, could be everyone's goal here. And just kind of going down my list, when I've driven around there and driven by there, went by there tonight, traffic was a major concern. First thing I noticed was the U-turn that's going to occur at Falcon Circle and Broadway. I, in fact, did a U-turn there. And I don't know if stacking becomes an issue. I'm not sure what the traffic is like during those rush hour conditions in that dedicated turn lane into Falcon Circle there. But something that needs to be addressed, and that kind of piggybacks onto the traffic going around Falcon Circle too. To get into the site would have to be looked at. Headlights going into the neighbor's property is an unfortunate. No matter what develops on this property, I think that's just something that's going to have to be addressed as delicately as it can be. I think it's going to be a need to happen, unfortunately. Looking at the site, I don't know if there's going to be overflow parking into Lotus Park at all, but depending on what that commercial space is, it's not a large space. This isn't a commercial development. At least it's not the focus of it. There might be more pedestrian crossing if parking becomes an issue. And architecturally speaking, overall, I think the footprint's okay. Masonry, I'd like to see a lot more. I realize these are real conceptual kind of beginnings of graphics and things, but more masonry. Not crazy about the orange and the blue, but those are details that get flushed out later down the line. Landscaping, again, would have to be addressed. One positive is that hill in the back, although it's a civil engineering stormwater problem for the developer. it does provide some of a natural buffer, which if it was just a flat site, for that adjacent property, having an outdoor common space looking down on them, I think is how it would end up. Is unfortunate, but the right to develop, I recognize that as well. It's just how graceful we can be about making parties happy. Piggybacking on some of the comments, green initiatives, lead components for green infrastructure, I think would be a plus. One thing I gotta say is a relief to see is that you do meet the parking requirements, which is rarely seen in this commission. It's usually a constant battle. And to see that was a good thing to see. I think those are my comments for the moment.
Great, thank you, Rob. Brian?
All right, where to start? I'll start with the comment, which really right now the first floor parking, I get it completely. And then the breakdown of current commercial really only requiring 10 stalls. Clearly there are going to be some that are residents parking in that front parking lot or as it's currently designed. And so a recognition of that, or the belief that there'll be less than the number of cars identified, and that's more of an open space. But it gets, I address that with a different question or thought. First, it might be helpful for me to kind of say my comment about the Broadway Design District and the guidelines, which might be different than other members of the commission. And I understand the guidelines that exist, and I understand the connection to this site, and I recognize the connection of this site with the Riverfront project and what's on the Trace property and the desire of the city to connect the riverfront across the front of this property and then across the street. And there's been explicit efforts to make the connection of how do all of those fit together. And because the architecture and design elements in Riverfront and Tracesta, they seem more consistent with what's designed here than what's in the Broadway corridor design of more of the pitched roofs, the 612, 812, the Fairway Glen concept. I think if this was purely just a residential building, the Fairway Glen kind of model, and it would abandon the desire that the city had at some point to connect Riverfront with the Tracesta property. So I only mention that because it's our own inconsistency. And we might need to have some further discussions about that plan and how it fits. And I'd love to hear kind of, after I say that, I'd be happy to hear what others have to say regarding that. The next item I had is the right-of-way that's on the east side of the property. I don't understand why we would need to abandon that right-of-way. It doesn't affect the footprint of this current building at all.
We can have the applicant come up and do that, but that was.
That's where stormwater's going.
Yeah.
Okay. Anticipated stormwater, as soon as they start paying you to figure that out. So then it leads to my other question of Chris's point regarding CDD and what do we envision on this site and how does it connect with a neighborhood that has single family and multifamily adjacent. And one idea is actually lining Broadway with the building with the true commercial space and have the parking behind and fit in the buffer with the units above. I know there's reasons why it's designed the way it is, both kind of for the interesting aspect of breaking it up rather than having one long piece of property. But that could also address some of the issues with buffering with the neighborhood and having different parking or different landscape elements on the backside. But it changes the project from 99% residential with one commercial space to maybe multiple smaller commercial spaces with residential above. I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. Well, I wondered, yeah, what kind of commercial space was envisioned? Do you have a thought about what might go in here, or? Okay, because it is an odd space, although I guess one main concern I have is also the density. It just seems like a big building for that space, but I like the shape of it. I guess I feel like there's that whole wooded area behind it, which is sort of a buffer, and we have other areas where there are apartments near single-family housing. So for me, that doesn't seem like such a big issue, and I thought the fact that it was limited to 3 stories overall sort of mitigated against that. I kind of like the idea of having that underground, under the sheltered parking behind under those units. I think that basic design is good. I'm again thinking the whole building might be a little big, but we'll leave that to more discussion. I also had a concern about building materials, although what I was thinking was, I guess, more possibly looking a little bit more like the current. I mean, that looking at those kinds of colors and that kind of structure might, in terms of the consistency that you talked about, I think that would work. I also love the Fairway Glen building, and that's my favorite, I guess, of the apartments that have gone up recently. But if we were trying to be consistent, that would be a little more consistent. And I would like to see more brick or stone or something, and it wasn't clear. What I was seeing here was a lot of flatness, but that's just maybe this initial design. So it's something with more masonry and thinking about the architecture more would be important, I think. Let's see, what else does materials. Yeah, it looks to me like more like 10 parking spots for the commercial. If there's 300, it's 1 to 300 square feet, and there's 3,000 feet. But the parking just makes it, I guess. I think that's, although I'm also thinking if you have more commercial, and maybe this would be an argument for putting another commercial piece on the lower floor, that would tend to be used during the day more, so when the residents are home at night, some of that surface lot gets freed up for some additional parking for them as well. So, that might be something to think about. And otherwise, and I also would ditto Peter's comment about the solar. If there's any way to build that in, it does seem like an obvious thing, and that would be a selling point as well. I know that's another cost, so I'm not sure what kinds of credits are available for that now, but I think some of the cost has gone down, so I'd like to see that investigated. Otherwise, yeah, I guess I'd think about just having one commercial space there struck me as a little odd, and I had the same thought. You could maybe sell 2 apartments on that lower level or have people in them, but it might be worth thinking about. Should that keep the parking the way it is, the sheltered parking, but should that whole first floor be commercial? Maybe, I don't know. I think that's all I have for now. Everything's already been said pretty much, I think.
Great, thank you, Susan. Griff?
I would be a little less concerned about the commercial aspects about it, because I really think this is primarily a residential project, and that because of the parking problems, I think you can accommodate the resident portion of it easier than you can the commercial portion of it. And I also agree that it might be worthwhile looking to put the building completely along Broadway, depending on that it would relieve some of the proximity to the residential neighborhood, and also maybe relieve a little bit of the parking along Falcon Circle. I am less concerned about, I would favor having more masonry, but I do recognize that the buildings across the way at Tresta, the buildings in the new Triangle development, and the new building across from Shopko are all much more in line with the design that is here than they are with the traditional designs of the Broadway district. And I think, as Brian said, we have kind of created the problem over a period of time. So even though I would favor some investigation into some better materials, I think probably the design is going to have to reflect those nearby edifices. That's about all I have.
Thank you, Griff. I just have a few things myself, and that is, if you look at the Monona Comprehensive Plan and the discussion of housing mix strategies, it certainly calls for us to feature new urbanism, both with new design and with infill developments. And so I think, to me, new urbanism, among other things, speaks to standardized setbacks, which I understand you have some limitations on because of other issues, and also the sidewalks along the front, which I was glad to hear about. Although, but the other thing that several people have brought up is potentially the whole idea of moving the parking to the back, which as opposed to having a big lot on the side. And I wondered if there was a way to actually flip, in a sense, the long piece, push the long piece down and push the shorter piece up, so you still get some multi-dimensions, but you're able to put that parking lot in the back rather than on the side, because again, pushing the whole development up to the edge, as other people have already mentioned, up to toward the edge of Broadway, would be more consistent with a new urbanism type design. And honestly, as a paddler, I know this is just a conceptual design, but I would never be putting a bike or a boat out in front on a parking lot like that. I would want, if I had something that I wanted to store outside, I'd much rather have it behind where it's hidden. I'm not going to put it on in a parking lot where a million cars are going to go by on Broadway. So then, I think if that space is, the intention is to have residents use it, that way it makes sense to have it behind the building. I would certainly echo what several people had said here tonight around the solar, and I'm sure you probably already know this, but the next RECIP, Focus on Energy RECIP grant period, the RFPs will be available in May. Is the next cycle of those RECIP grants. Should you look into solar, and I certainly would echo also in relation to our sustainability commitment and clean energy commitment, that really starts with energy efficiency. So certainly this committee is going to be looking for that as well, and lighting and other things when we get into details in the future. I would echo the question that was asked around affordability. Again, that was part of our comprehensive plan. Section 2.1.6 spoke specifically around affordability. And I also just wondered if the one solo commercial piece makes sense. We certainly want this to succeed for you and for the city, and it just strikes me as kind of odd that I was trying to think if there are any other. In fact, I drove around a little bit today thinking about, are there any other entities that I know of where there's one commercial space and everything else is residential? So it seems like, as several other people have mentioned, either making that section all commercial or moving away from the commercial altogether makes more sense to me than just having a solo space like that. But that's all I had. Any other feedback that individual committee members have this evening? Do you feel like you've?
Nancy,
Yes.
Can we maybe cycle back through since
Sure.
there was some
Absolutely.
different types of feedback?
Absolutely.
And I don't know how I would lead it if I were them.
Yeah, well, I was just about to ask them
Awesome.
if it's been clear as mud, because I'm sure. So I'm happy to do that. Chris?
Well, I'd be totally confused if I was them right now.
Yeah.
For me, we have to reduce density some. I think it's too much next to the residential neighborhood, and I think if we did that, we could solve a lot of these other issues. I think it'd give you some more room, it'd allow you to do some different things. I'm not sure if you can flip it and get that garage up on Broadway, because then that kind of flips the other end. I'm just not sure how you do that, but I suppose a really, really good.
Can I
arch-
speak
Yeah,
to that
come on,
now?
You bet, come on right up.
Adam, can you put the site plan up and show me where the sewer is? Once you guys see where the sewer line is?
Yeah, it's not listed here.
Oh, yeah, I gotcha.
Sure, have a copy where the sewer line is.
It's the easement right here.
I'll show you on the plan, which is.
Isn't that the easement?
Driven where we're at.
Isn't this it?
Can we get the computer put on, please?
There we go.
Yeah, there.
Okay, so it has to come through this.
Through here.
So it's not on our plan?
It's not on this plan, no.
Okay.
The sewer line's gonna go through here, so
Okay.
the building gets real short before we say
Sure.
this curve. So
Okay.
we tried several options
Yep.
of placing the building up top. And then show where the ATC line is. ATC line is the heavy dash line.
The inside one or the outside?
The outside one, and then that's the setback.
Okay, so it's the, right next to the sidewalk is ATC, and what's your setback from ATC?
20.
20, okay. So I don't know if it'll clear anything up, but for me, it's too dense. For me, I definitely want to see commercial there. It's a commercial design district, it's not multifamily. So for me, when I looked at this, I thought, well, there's a 20-some thousand square foot footprint, we need, 20,000 square foot of commercial. Well, you can't do that the way it's designed. But for me, at least that front piece should be commercial and give it a chance to succeed. And some places where we've had isolated ones, Fairy Glen's a good example, they put it in, but then they converted it to their workout room and all this other stuff, so it kind of disappeared. Some commercial on Broadway, I think, is still important to the district. And again, I'm not telling you it's gonna be retail. We all know retail won't survive in that little space, but there are commercial uses, small offices, all kinds of things. Maybe some of your neighbors need a little space. I don't know, but it seems to rent up for the stuff we've put in. So for me, the architecture, I'd much rather see Fairway Glen. I think Traceta is a mistake. It's our lowest common denominator in that entire design district, and it's the only building like it in the design district. Now, the Triangle is its own little area, and we went through that extensively, and I think Traceta was a mistake. If you look at every other building around here, it hits some components of the Broadway corridor design district. Do they have to all look the same? Of course not. But something, if I lived here and I had this building, and I will say right away, and somebody mentioned the building down on Broadway further down, I've had more complaints about us allowing that building, and it's in Madison, and I have people call me, how could you allow that building in Monona? Well, we actually didn't. And so I wouldn't hold that up as a shining example. People that I've talked to, and maybe I talked to the wrong people, they do not like that building at all. And I'm not saying your building looks like that, don't take it that way. But that's the, it's more towards that than it is towards the Broadway. Please don't take this personally. I'm just describing the things I've heard. So Traceta is big, but also remember when we did Traceta, we allowed it when it was surrounded by commercial properties. This isn't. This is next to a residential district. I don't know about you, but I would not like a 3-story building 10 foot off my property line next to my house. And there has to be some type of buffering or some type of softening or something. And that's why I'm saying with less density on there, that could happen. It opens up a lot of possibilities. As far as the other items, I think you've gotten fairly consistent feedback on all the rest of it. I think what you need to know from us is, well, I think nobody said this project should never be on site. But we've had different opinions on how big it should be. So I think you need to know that. I think you need some direction on architecture. I think you need some direction, certainly. I think the density, if it gets less, it clears up some of the buffering items and things like that. So I guess from what I've heard, those would be the things I'd be confused on. I'm speaking, and I know it's gonna take forever to put that overhead on, but if there was any kind of parking lot like this, I took just the drive aisles behind there, and certainly we'd have an area in the middle that could be a green space, and it might even be somewhere to put your water in, and maybe even get some infiltration or something, but I mean, we're not getting into those kinds of details, but if you do come back and you're redoing something, certainly we'd want to reduce the pavement as much as we can while still maintaining the areas they can.
All right, Rob?
I don't have a lot to add. Mainly that I wasn't on plan commission when Trace went in. So I want that on
No,
there.
where's that?
But I don't have a lot to add to what Chris had said. I think density is an issue. The architecture, I would like to see something happen here. I think there's the seed of something good to make that site better for Monona and all parties involved. So, yeah, that's all the time I need to take up.
Okay. Brian?
I'm good.
You good? Susan?
Yeah, I think the only other thing Brent was messing around with drawings here, if just to look at whether there is a way to reorient the building slightly, particularly, and I'm not sure there really is, given that you want that sheltered parking as part of it. But if you had more commercial in the front along Broadway and then more of parking in the back, and I don't know if that's possible. Less density would be good, but I don't know if the numbers are gonna work out if you do that, so that'd just be something I'd look at again, and then, yeah, the architecture. Well, and, yeah, our policies basically do call for some green space within a parking area, too. So when you think about how many parking spaces are in here, I guess make sure there is some green space in there. Because I don't know how that all plays out when you, in that surface lot. I think that's all.
Okay. Okay, right.
Can I make a comment or?
You, absolutely.
Just a couple comments. Adam has spent half his life over the 6 months looking at where you site the property. And so, although it may be an inelegant solution, it is a solution, and all the other solutions are inferior to what we've put forward today. And secondly, with respect to commercial, that's a head scratcher because you can't get a curb cut on Broadway. And you really want to be concerned about loading traffic on Falcon, and we are legitimately concerned about that, and we do want to be a good neighbor. And I'm a property owner on that street. So commercial is a head scratcher because, again, you can't get another curb cut, you can't get a left turn lane, and you're going to be loading traffic on the Falcon Circle. So the desire for more commercial is a bit problematic. And I can assure you that every attempt was really, the site really wants the building to be pushed up as close to the sidewalk as you can and run all the way down Broadway. That's ideal, and that's not possible with the ATC line there and with the sanitary sewer. So it's, I really believe that every attempt has been made to utilize the site appropriately, and Adam has done everything possible on that. And if I was Adam, I'd probably be tired of talking to me about the site. A couple other comments from Sonia. We did know about the plan. You know, it's hard to speak when she's not here. She thought that it would make a good case to advocate for no commercial on that site because of the lack of curb cuts and the ability to get them, and because you don't want to load traffic on the Falcon Circle. But we heard loud and clear from the CDA that commercial would be required on the site, and that's a non-starter to not have commercial there. So we initially proposed a 60 unit approximately. We heard from the CDA that was too dense. We went down to a 48 unit. We heard from the CDA that was too dense, and so we proposed a 41 unit, which you see today, and we increased the commercial probably each time. So I am mindful also of the commercial space at Tresta, and you know, we can argue Steve Doran's site to the west. He has been successful. I think that's 100% leased. I think he maybe has 1,000 square feet left. I think that's a far superior site from a parking standpoint and mixed use. So I don't compare my site to Steve's site. And with respect to Tresta, we will make a more respectable project. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
If I could just comment about a couple of those things. I agree the trace to commercial is very difficult, but you've got to walk all along that building too. Your site is far superior to trace to for your commercial. Your parking lot's right next to where your commercial space is. It's a right in, right out almost, but so is Qdoba, so is, the other half of that is Mr. Brews. There's a lot of, like, if you're on Broadway, you have excellent visibility. That's the one thing you have going for you. Your visibility there for commercial is fabulous. And being right on the road, people know it's a right, and there are places where U-turns are allowable. So to me, commercial is a must, and to me, I just want to respond. I don't know about the rest of the commissioners, but if your building came back the same thing you presented tonight, I wouldn't support it.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So I would just like to echo what Chris said earlier tonight, and that is I really, really appreciate everyone who has sat through this meeting. It's like making sausage, just the beginning of the process. Although these guys don't feel like it's the beginning at all because they've already been through CDA for a long time. But I really appreciate the citizens that showed up today, all of you that showed up, whether you're part of the neighborhood or not, and appreciate you providing feedback. Hope you feel like we've listened. We always try. With that, I will close the pre-hearing conference and move to number 7 on the agenda, which is reports of staff and commission members. Thank you again very much.
I don't have anything upcoming. There's nothing tentatively scheduled for April 22nd, so we can consider that meeting canceled.
We can consider the 22nd canceled. Okay?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. It is canceled?
Yes.
Okay. Any plan commission requests?
Madam Chair, sorry. I
Oh,
have
sorry. Yes.
One information item for the commission.
Yes.
So the new city planner, Mr. Douglas Plowman, will be starting with the city on April 16th. So likely your first opportunity to meet him will be at our first plan commission meeting in May. So obviously he'll be in attendance for that. So just so you know that that's coming down the pike.
Okay.
Douglas Plowman?
Douglas, okay, great. Any other plan commission requests for information concerning development projects? No? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move for adjournment.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.